My name's Chris Ayers. I'm a senior fast track engineer at Microsoft. I'm on the Azure engineering team, and fast track, we help our customers kind of get to the cloud quickly, securely, more reliably. I blog. I haven't blogged in a while, but I do blog. I'm on Twitter, and all my code, all my slides, all my samples are going to be up at GitHub at CodeBytes. And so we're going to talk about configuration. I'm gonna dig a little bit and bring up how framework handled configuration. We're gonna dive into core 5, 6, 7, like how all the new configuration engine it works, and configuration providers and binding options patterns. Got lots of demos, and I know we don't have a lot of time. And this is really slated towards LTS, though I have tested and run all of this in .NET 7, and I'll point out a couple of places where there's some improvements and some tweaks that 7 brings. So configuration, what is it? For a lot of us, it might be like those things we just saw from Layla about maybe retry settings or back off times or something around queue length. We might leverage feature flags, so turning stuff on and off for users, or like a percentage for canary releases or progressive rollouts. And technically it might be secrets, but I like to kind of push secrets to a different area of discussion because secret management really requires a little bit of thought. You don't want to I mean, it is a type of configuration though, but just I'm aware of it acting in a little different way. So how can we apply configuration? And this is where I think historically with framework and some of the other patterns like Gitflow, we apply configuration at compile time for a lot of things. We might have a dev branch and we would apply our debug or dev configuration, and it would kind of get baked in with the application. We might have a release or production configuration. We would compile it at runtime or compile it with that configuration. And so every kind of build had its own config that we would then put on the server or deploy. A lot of modern techniques where we're doing like GitHub flow, release flow, trunk-based development, we're compiling once and we're taking those same binaries and applying them with configuration when we deploy it out. And now I know on some front-end frameworks where you have env files, a lot of times you have to build it because of minimization and stuff. But with .NET, a lot of times we'll take that one binary and transform it when we set it out there. So with .NET Framework, what did configuration look like? Now, I got a little gray in my beard, so I kind of remember it was all XML based. We had this web config. It really just had key value pairs. You had this static configuration manager class. It was really hard to do dependency injection or separate concerns. Like you had to kind of wrap it with an interface that you made. You might add something called like Slow Cheetah, which lets you do XML transformation. They're very hard to test. And so this is kind of small. So let me just switch over to .NET Framework. Uh, I know someone in our audience might remember this great, we had app settings, we could have keys, we could have values. We really just, had to deal with all of this. And if we wanted, we could also there was an XML transformation language where we could map against different keys, and we could try to transform the XML on the fly. It was not fun. Did not enjoy it. It was a source of many pains. And we might have to try wrapping our configuration manager class so that we could map those things. Everything was a string. We'd have to convert to int and or bool. So with 6, which is our LTS version, this applies to 7. This also applies to older ones, 5, 3, and 2. Configuration engine completely revamped. So in the .NET configuration system, there's configuration sources. These might be like JSON files, could be environment variables, could be command line settings, or just other things inside the configuration, like it could be a custom provider. Those sources get fed into providers. We have a JSON provider, environment provider, in-memory provider. There's a user secrets provider, so I'll talk about those. And what the configuration builder does is it goes through them in order. Like there's a distinct order. And so as I've drawn here, if JSON files are first and then environment variables, the builder processes them in that order. And so if like a JSON file sets a setting and then an environment file sets the same setting, the environment one will win because it's kind of like last one wins. And then that gives you an iConfiguration. So to be a little bit clearer, let's say our JSON file sets our environment as dev and our DB as localhost, and then we have an environment variable that says DB is constraint. And then we add a different variable on our command line. Well, when the configuration builder builds that, we're going to get this flattened, kind of unified piece of configuration that is the sum of all of our sources and providers. And so, like I said, we've got our keys that are kind of flattened as well. So, you might have a JSON file with a hierarchy, like logging, log level, default. When that gets flattened down into the configuration system, you're going to have like colons separating the hierarchy for binding purposes. That applies if we're dealing with like key files, or if we're doing command line stuff. The way inside our code will access the secrets through this hierarchy is colon kind of separated amongst the hierarchies. You can see how flat that is now. We can also do cool things. I'm going to show you all these in demos. I just want to kind of get through some theory to set the groundwork. You can also leverage binding. So we can say like, give me a section of our code or bind it to a class. And so instead of having just pure key value strings that we have to do conversion ourselves, the binding engine can use reflection. If our class says it's a bool or a time span, when it loads that in and binds to that object, it'll do that transformation for us. Now, out of the box with a new console app, we have no configuration system added to it. And so I'm going to show you, as we build up on the console apps, how that gets layered in. Now, ASP out of the box is going to get like a JSON provider and a user secrets provider and environment command line. And there's a wide variety of them. I mentioned quite a few of them already. And the way they look in code, before we get into the demo, is like, hey, we have a JSON provider. So we're going to have some sort of app settings, JSON maybe. And we're going to say in our configuration, I want to add a JSON file. It could be optional. We might want to reload the file when that file changes, or restart. This is where we can have the apps respond to changing configuration. XML, same kind of way, same kind of, I've got this XML file, I'm going to add it in. Environment variables, we can set environment variables on our command line, and then we can actually even respond to, say, only look at environment variables that have this custom prefix so that you can separate it from other environment variables if you need to. We can add command line and mapping, we can add files, we can do stuff in memory. Let's get to the code. Like, let's just get to some real demos. As I said, you got a basic terminal, you just do .NET new, you get this console write line. There's really no configuration there. So if we want to start adding in configuration, the first thing we might want to do is add in the Microsoft Extensions configuration and something like maybe Microsoft Extensions configuration JSON. These NuGet packages provide the basis for the configuration stuff. Oops. Hit the wrong button because it's fun. There we go. So we're going to be using extensions configuration. And now there are some samples out there doing iHost Builder, and you can leverage that. Like I said, I wanted to start simple. I wanted to start small. And so if we're just going to add a configuration builder and I want to add a JSON file, it doesn't have to be named app setting. That's very much a convention we do, especially for ASP. But I can add that JSON file and I'm going to build my configuration. And the way I access it is I just do like configuration bracket. I do, normal indexer. And so I've got a couple of variables in my config file and I'm going to just access those. So if I .NET run that, I should see hello world. Yep. And my configuration is dev because that's what I've defined in my config file. If I change this to QA and save it, I've got the ability to tweak my configuration simply based on the config file. Awesome. Let's look at the next layer. So what if we wanted to also add environment variables? Well, I'm going to add that NuGet package for environment variables, and I can just say add environment variables. That is going to, let us control things. So I'm going to set my environment to QA, and I'm going to run it. And even though my config file says dev, it's printing out QA because back to this, the order of things, it's going to load config JSON first, then it's going to override environment variables, any that match with those values. And if I unset my environment again and rerun, it should go back to QA because I'm not setting that environment anywhere. It's going to just be pulling from, probably need to just say null or something. Anyways, let's keep going. So the next layer that we would put here is maybe we want to add in command line args. So you can see I'm just doing add command line and I'm adding args. And the way those will work is, and you can kind of see it right here. I can override I need to change it. I can override that parameter just by saying dash dash and then the name of the setting I want to do. And I'll show you about those hierarchical values as well in a moment. But we're just passing these values right on command line. So we've got configuration prod printed out even though my environment is dev. So the reason we do some of these things, to environment variables, to command line switches, we a lot of times will override that configuration specifically for containers, if we're doing container stuff, or if we're doing different startup values when we're running things in the cloud or in different directories. Now, this one, I've added user secret. If I know Layla actually just used user secrets. Whenever I am working with a database or some other connection, what I try to do is not store any of those things in my configuration files. I don't want to accidentally check them in. I don't want to push them up to a public repo. I don't want to do any of those things. So .NET has a user secrets capability that let us set some sort of value if we want. And the way that user secrets work, just like the others, we've got, some configuration stuff here, user secrets, environment command line. But when you use your secrets init, it will add a GUID into your CS proj file. And that is used to just track a settings JSON file that is hidden out in your user local hierarchy. So it'll be it'll be in a different part of your file system, kind of away from everything else. And so I could set something like greeting is equal to, hey there. So now if I run this, once that finishes, and that could be maybe a setting I use for my, like I said, database connection string, hey there world. And then I can unset that if I wanted to, I could, and you can list them out. And so now that we've got a lot of the basic building blocks, we can start tweaking things. So what if I want a hierarchy of objects? So now I've got that greeting with a hierarchy, message, color. And the way we access that, like I told you before, we're just flattening it down. We're using a colon to separate things. So we're going to go back and forth between things with a colon. And we can actually pass those on command line even with that hierarchy. Depending upon your OS, you might need to escape or quote the string. I'm doing it in blue. I can say red. You can usually also do a double underscore instead of that colon if you need to, depending upon your OS. So I'm doing the hierarchy separated by the double underscore, and I can override the different colors just by passing on command line. Now that can be confusing for some users. You might want to simplify things, and this is where we can do cool stuff like make mappings. We can make friendly names for our command line options, and this is all out of the box. We can do friendly options for our command line. So instead of having to do all this, I could just say color, and that mapping will take care of getting the right setting. So I should see green hello world here. Yep, so there we go, we got green. So that's really how we can play around with some of the different pieces, how they kind of interact. Now let's looking at the configuration in more depth. Like what happens is we're working with configuration and how might we want to decide to design our configuration and our settings. So let's say, and you can see I'm printing out a bunch of values here. I'm doing some sort of converter app. I do a lot of my slides and a lot of my technology in Markdown. And so maybe I want to do a Markdown converter and output things in different ways and settings. When I first start doing it, I might just start adding a bunch of settings in a flat manner. I'm just doing kind of primitive obsession. I'm just setting some values. I'm just printing them out. And I really don't have anything to store them with. I'm just accessing my configuration and the name of the setting. Well, what if I wanted to map those in a different way? I want to get them into a configuration object. That's where we can start doing things. And I realize my timing is off, so I'm gonna speed up. We can start nesting them, PDF out file extension. So we can start doing that nesting to make things a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier. I'm still not taking advantage of objects. What if I want to, take it to the next level? Still got my my objects. I've got them kind of grouped. But now what I can do is I could say, hey, I want to get one section. And this kind of shows me a like a binding of like a configuration thing, but just with PDFs. And you can see I'm calling a method with options, and I've called it a couple of different times. Instead of saying PDF file extension, I'm kind of saying my root is going to be right here instead of up here. And so because all three objects have the same groups of settings, I've kind of standardized it. I can now start treating these like, hey, here are my options for file extensions or my options for sections. Well, now let's take this to the next level and turn it into an object. Let's have an object like a file options object. Now we have a class. And I realize these are all strings, like I have a file extension string and an output directory string, but I will show you about, I mentioned the bindings work with other types of objects. So, if I run this guy, it's still printing out a lot of the same things. If I look at my JSON, it's still the same way with the nested. But now that I've got this file object, what I can do is I can say configuration, I can get section, I can bind it to an object. I can say get section and I can get type one of these. So I have different ways of getting these objects and it's going to bind to them. So like I said, let's say we want to do, bool enabled or public bool enabled. Now, if you don't have a public setter, the configuration system will not be able to set that value or bind to it. Let's see here. So you got to make sure it's a public, it has a public setter. So let's just say datetime, sure, something like that. So now we can go into our config file and I could say enable true. I think it called it last runtime. Let's just take a look, last run. There we go. So now we're going to have some Booleans and some dates, and hopefully I won't have to do anything crazy to make it work. I missed one. Yep, missed one. Boom. So let's try running it again. Oh, and I add those to the output. So we were just doing our output here. Let's just go ahead and Now we didn't get an error, so I'm adding this to the output just to show that it bounded over. But yeah, so it's automatically translating dates. It's automatically doing Booleans. Very easy to work with configuration when we're binding. Now ASP is a little different, and that's why I have a whole bunch on ASP. Out of the box, ASP, like I showed you before, comes with a lot of predefined sources already. And then if I go to my slides for a moment, because we are about to dive into a couple of things. One of them is the options pattern. Now this lets you kind of do some interface segregation and separation of concerns. You might not always want to inject iConfiguration into all of your stuff. You might not also want to inject, like an iOptions. So there are a couple of ways where you can use stuff as a singleton or not allow them to be used in a singleton. But if you do stuff like singletons, a lot of times it'll read the config values right at the start, and then it will not um, let you update them. If you tweak them on the config file or data source, because that singleton was created at instantiation, it won't show the updated values. There's also a thing I'm going to talk about called named parameters or named values. But iOptions also provides like a snapshot and a monitor. These can have performance considerations, just going to let you know, but you can inject these things into your services or controllers and get the values updated more often. So let's get into .NET. So this is my sample .NET app. Notice I have a providers button here. So this out of the box is going to give me a memory provider. I'm going to get some change configuration providers. It's going to get app settings and app settings dev and my environment variables. How did I find out all this information? Well, there is a page here called providers, and I injected my iConfiguration. I don't have to do anything special in settings. Like you can inject that anywhere, but I selected out all the providers. They're available. Um, Another couple things I want to show you is you can, like, just like our app before, you can inject, like that's injecting configuration. I can inject iOptions, iSnapshots, iMonitors. And the reason I'm showing you that I injected all these is, I injected an iOption snapshot of my Markdown converter class, or I injected a iOptions monitor and an iOptions, and then I just injected the configuration, just like the whole configuration. So iConfiguration, I'm doing that binding, getting a section, binding it to a file option. But the other ones, what I did down here in program, configure Markdown converter, and I just point it at a configuration section. In my settings, I wrapped all of that stuff I had before in a section, Markdown converter, and I made a class that has multiple nested objects, that PDF, that doc, that Markdown style, that just like the class we had before. But you can see how cool that is, where with like one line of code, I've given it a parent class and um, a section, and it's doing all the nested binding for me. Like it's just handling all of that. Now, another cool thing, and I did mention like the updating. So if I set this to false, if I just start turning these all to false, or maybe I say docx, I made some updates. If I go back to my web page and I refresh, this says docx, they say false now. So just injecting the pure configuration, I'm getting the updated values. Now, the iOptions, this still says true, and this still says false and doc. So because I injected that iOptions, and if you'll remember here, that's a singleton, and it does not support reloading. So this one did not do reloading. But if I look at my snapshot, that has docx and false, like this responded to those updated values right away. And now this is where you kind of have control over, do you want every single time a request comes in, it gets the absolute latest value? Maybe you want it to, through the whole chain of that request, it has one consistent value. And that's where you can use the snapshots and the monitors to reflect those. Just to keep moving along, um, I mentioned the name thing earlier, and I just want to show that real quickly because it is an interesting feature. And this is where you are injecting potentially multiple things with the same type. So in my program, again, around the same thing, I'm injecting configuring file options 3 times, and I'm naming it. So this configured file options is going to be called PDF. This configured file options is doc. And it doesn't work well for all the things. Um, where am I looking? Yeah, so I options, I make new ones. I just have file options value. I can't get the other ones. The way you get a named value is you can say, I have an iOption snapshot of file options, and it doesn't say which one I want. So I say file options get this one. I want that one with the name PDF. I want that one with the name doc. And that's kind of the distinguishing factor. Like with the snapshot and monitor, you can ask for the different variations of a single thing, but with options, you can't, um, because the injection won't work. But I can here and I can ask for those. Um, and I'm just showing this off. You can inject iConfiguration right into Razor. So where I before, um, you if I look at using configuration and I inject it right here, and I'm doing the binding in the Razor. So you can do that if you want to. Um, I usually don't, but you can. All right. So there's a whole bunch more. I'm gonna just go ahead and show 1 or 2 last things just because it's awesome. But I've got to wrap up. I want to thank everyone for the time they've given me today. If you look in validation, it has one of the coolest things where you can validate your configuration with data annotations. Like you can actually validate and have custom validations on all your properties and actually stop your application if your data, your configuration, um, doesn't match what you need, if you don't have a required file, if you don't have a valid range. So go ahead and take a look at all my demos. They're out on CodeBytes.net configuration in depth. This is out on GitHub. Um, I've got some demos from Key Vault and Azure App Config, but um, time's a little short, and I apologize about that. So I want to thank everyone for the time.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris, and
Yeah.
thank you, Sean, for sharing the code examples there. Yep, sorry, we are at time. I know that you had a bit more
Oh,
to
it's okay.
cover, but there's a lot layered in there. So if you have
Yeah.
more questions for Chris, please feel free to reach out to him on Twitter, LinkedIn, straight on GitHub, um, and he can help and take the conversation from there. Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, you're welcome. And love to continue that conversation. So
Yeah,
reach out.
great, amazing. Take care.